game is dumb. Who would ever swap an Enzo engine into an F40?
Yeah, it would be pretty sick if someone did it, though.
Can you guys quit messing around? We have to go catch this flight. Real quick, before the episode begins, we finally have new StanceWorks merch. We've got our F40 tees in stock in black and white. If you want to support the channel, this is absolutely the best way to do it. These are the highest quality shirts you could put together. And if you don't want a car-themed shirt, you want something you can wear elsewhere, we've got a little bit of everything for everybody in multiple colorways. It's all live right now on StanceWorks.com/store, but you got to grab it now because it's probably going to sell out within the day. Now onto the episode.
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but here in about an hour, we are boarding a flight to Frankfurt, Germany to buy an engine. And it's an engine for our F40 project. It's beyond anything I thought we'd ever have. It's the craziest engine I'm ever going to own. You guys are coming along with us. Let's head to Germany and buy our power plant.
Now you might be wondering, what kind of engine is worth a flight to the other side of the world? And the answer is one that brand new costs a staggering $94,000. And given that this deal seems a little bit too good to be true, I figured it was probably worth making the trip to check it out in person. Byron, Khalil, Josh, Ryan, and Anthony were all intent on making the trip, so we booked our tickets and headed towards Frankfurt. All right, we finally have a van that's going to fit all of us and all of our luggage. And now begins, 2-hour drive to Lenstadt and then hotel, and we need to sleep. It was a challenge to find a rental vehicle that could hold all 6 of us and all of our luggage. But after a number of attempts, we landed on a Citroën van and hit the road. This is technically my 3rd trip to Germany, but I've never spent any time behind the wheel, so the first order of business, as you might expect, is to hit the Autobahn. And you know I'm going to push this Citroën van to its limit. That limit, for the curious, is 187 kilometers per hour, or for us Yanks, 116 miles per hour. Surprisingly, although they're allowed to speed as much as they want, most Germans didn't seem to be in much of a hurry. But we were, and we made it to Lenstadt in record time. But, to be clear, that's in the wrong direction because our engine is in Munich, a full 8 hours away. So what are we doing here? Well, the first order of business on our trip is to visit some friends. We're not going to travel 6,000 miles without making the absolute most of it. All right, we made it to the hotel. It's 11 p.m. It's a very long day. We are, maybe 3 miles from H&R, would you say?
Yeah.
Give or take. So in the morning, we're going to go check out some suspension, talk about some F40 suspension, and then begin making our way to Munich. So we all deserve some sleep. That's what's next.
Good morning. Morgan. Morgan.
What's up? That was miserable. But we here. Guten Morgen.
Hold up. Tell the people what you're most excited about today. You know what you're
Eating not airplane food. So
No,
McDonald's. That's attached to H&R apparently.
He has mentioned wanting McDonald's while we're here in Germany. That's the only food he's mentioned.
Dude, you have to try every fast food in the world.
Go away. After the rest of us enjoyed some real food, we hit the road and finished our journey towards H&R. The goal is to, of course, begin the process of planning out our suspension goals for our F40. H&R has been an integral part of every project I've ever undertaken, and this one's no different. They're going to roll out the red carpet so that we can develop a coilover system for this car that will perform unlike anything else. We're going to cover all of that in an upcoming episode dedicated specifically to suspension, because I've got some really cool parts in store, and while we were here, we also got a full tour of the factory to see how H&R's parts are made. I don't know about you guys, but this is the kind of nerdy stuff I really geek out on, so make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss this episode coming up in a couple of weeks. We're going to cover our center lock hubs, aluminum uprights, control arms, and of course our plans for H&R coilovers with push rods and bell cranks to mount this stuff inboard and take the project over the top just like everything else that we're doing. After filming for an entire day for that upcoming episode, we stayed the night and then hit the road bright and early the next morning to make that 8-hour journey towards Munich. It was an opportunity to see aspects of Germany that I wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Not only was it beautiful, it was in many ways reminiscent of home back in the South. But I know, what you guys are really here for and waiting on is the engine reveal, so let's go pick up an engine just a few kilometers away.
All right, so we had lunch. It was delicious. We are, I think, only a couple of kilometers away from the shop with the motor. I have no idea if they're even going to let us film once we get there. Hopefully they do. We're going to give this thing a leak down test and then hopefully pull the trigger. I've placed a deposit on it already. Now we just kind of find out if this deal is worth following through on. Fingers crossed. I'm so stoked for this. All the way to the other side of the world for an engine. This is nuts.
And finally, we're here. We've come to ATD Sports Cars, and after one glance around the parking lot, we quickly realized we are definitely in the right place. ATD specializes in, as you might guess, sports cars and specifically Ferraris. I know the thumbnail gave it away, but if you were expecting another Honda swap this time around, you were sorely mistaken. We are firmly in Ferrari territory. So much so, in fact, that we're in the presence of a legend. Lurking under the black cover is one of the 18 original and remaining Ferrari F40 LMs. And I want to be crystal clear, this is the real deal. It would have been worth flying to Germany just to see this car on its own, but here it was, a total surprise. Honestly, I wasn't sure I'd ever get the chance to see one of these in real life. For some of us, this is the mother of all Ferraris, and it's worth a staggering $10 million. Along with its unique bodywork, the power output was increased significantly, all the way up from 470 to 720. But I think that means there's still room on the table. If we use the F40 LM as the benchmark for the F40 Evo that we're going to build, well, that means it's time to talk about the engine that we're here to buy.
So when I first found the F40 body panels, of course, I was thinking about what engine I wanted to put in the...
Wait, hold up. Let's give this engine the intro it deserves. When it comes to Ferrari, there is no question. There's one engine that stands above all else when it comes to the heart of the brand. It's not a V6, and it's not a V8. I'd even argue that it is not the V10s of the Formula One era either. It is the Ferrari V12. This is the Ferrari F140, and it powers the car that bears Enzo Ferrari's name. In the Enzo's footsteps, this engine has powered every single V12 Ferrari since. This engine is Ferrari in the purest form, a 65-degree dual overhead cam V12 that relies on natural aspiration to make every single one of its 800 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. So buckle in, because here comes a history lesson. The story of the now iconic F140 V12 begins with the Ferrari Enzo. If you're somehow unfamiliar with this car, it's the successor to the F40 and F50. Importantly, it's the first car in Ferrari's history to bear the name of its founder, Enzo Ferrari. As the pinnacle of Ferrari's engineering at the time, Ferrari developed the F140B. As the genesis of the F140 platform, the B is punched out to 6 liters and produces 660 horsepower. At the time of its introduction, the F140 V12 was the most powerful Ferrari engine ever built, and that is a trend that has continued with multiple variants of the F140 ever since. Following the Enzo, we were given the 599, the FF, and the F12, only to eventually arrive at the La Ferrari, the official successor to the Enzo. Once again, this was the best Ferrari has to offer, and as a result, the F140 FE was revised to push out 789 horsepower from 6.3 liters. This version of the engine was paired with an F1-derived KERS system that produced in total 950. Up until last month with the introduction of the F80,
The LaFerrari and Aperta were heralded as the best of the best Ferrari has built in the last decade. One of the latest evolutions of the F140 was installed in the Daytona SP3. Some even herald this car as the final send-off for the ultimate NA V12. In total, there are 14 variations of the F140, ranging from 6 liters upon its introduction to 6.3 and then finally 6.5. The all-new Ferrari 12 Cylindri is likely to be the final car blessed with this magnificent engine, because if you haven't noticed, times are changing. But that brings us to our engine, and you're probably wondering what this one's out of. It's out of an 812 Superfast. And if you don't know what that is, I didn't really know what it was either up until we got this engine, because I'm not much of a supercar guy, I'm going to be honest. The benchmark for this project was an Enzo engine, a 6-liter version of this same motor that makes 660 horsepower. We did not expect to land a 6.5-liter that makes 800. And so, after inspecting our engine, we had to wait several grueling weeks for it to arrive stateside, but eventually it did arrive in just as good a condition as when we last saw it. As explained, this engine comes from an 812, produced all the way up until this year in 2024. This particular example was pulled from a front-end accident car that has only 609 miles on it. It didn't even make it through the break-in period. And I suppose, of course, you want to know what it sounds like. Well, here's a taste. Yeah, this is going to sound absolutely insane. But there's one other thing. Now, I know my choice of engine is still going to be hotly contested because it's not a V8 and it's not twin turbo. That means it's kind of not very F40-esque. We did talk about a 488 piston motor, but we're building a halo car here. I want Ferrari's halo engine. I want the best that they have to offer, and I want that 9,000 RPM V12 to scream from the back of this thing, and that's why we have this. So hopefully that answers the question, are we going to twin turbo this thing? Not yet. Maybe someday, maybe for V2 of this thing. I know the DDE guys have their F12 twin turbo project, and we can probably borrow some information from them, and we've got all the turbo sponsors we need, but for now, I want to hear this thing sing. We're going to convert it over to E85, ITBs, all sorts of other stuff. We'll talk about that here in a moment, but first we got to talk about this. This entire assembly right here is something I'm going to have to learn a lot about. We have our water pump and the dry sump oil pump, and they are gear driven off of the engine, as opposed to having a belt like our Honda motor over there, and I really don't know how any of it works. I've got to figure out all the plumbing. We've also got to figure out what to do about some of this damage that's right here on the front of the engine. You'll probably notice this alternator mount is a little bit messed up. Now, will that affect us? I don't really know. We might just have to massage this a little bit, maybe machine it, weld on it, or worst case scenario, we just move the alternator to the other side of the motor where the AC compressor was, because we are not going to have AC in this car. And then, of course, there's another drawback worth considering when it comes to using a 6.5-liter V12. That is the overall mass. This is not a small engine. It may just even be the biggest I've ever owned. Now let's talk about weight, because I know a bunch of you are rightfully going to be worried that this big V12 is going to be a heavy choice of engine. But if we look up here on the scale, this thing is only tipping it in at 447 pounds, or 440 depending on which take we're using, because this scale is kind of cheap. But the point is, this engine is actually quite lightweight for what it is. Now, it doesn't have all of the accessories on it. It's got a water pump, it's got the dry sump oil pump. It just doesn't have an alternator, and we don't have an intake. We don't have manifolds on the outside, which, by the way, these are going to be a bunch of fun to build. We're going to do some crazy 6-to-1 headers on each side of this thing. I am stoked for it. But realistically, this is a complete engine, and given that it's 447 pounds, you're going to be surprised when we compare this to the 4-cylinder out of the 244 GTK. Now, this, of course, is the K20 out of the 244 GTK, but you might be surprised to realize that if we pull the transmission off of it, which is about 80 pounds, and we don't account for the carbon fiber intake manifold, what we have sitting here, which is equal to the V12 in terms of the way that it's dressed, is 280 pounds, and that's not a huge difference considering the V12 is literally 3 times the amount of everything. And then, of course, there's the E36, which, if you want to use it as a comparison, The engine that's in this car, it's an inline six. Now it is an iron block, but it's considered a relatively lightweight engine in the scope of things. It's 480 pounds. We're gonna double that over here and go down in weight, which is incredible. Now, is this engine ideal when it comes to weight? Probably not. But is it gonna be lighter than what was originally in the F40? Yeah, I think so. But if we're gonna compare it to the original weight of the engine that came out of the Ferrari, I'm gonna feel pretty confident that this engine is quite a bit lighter. And the reason I say that is I weighed the engine that came out of the 308 when we did it, and the 308 motor, the F106, is the same engine that's in an F40, minus turbos, minus a bunch of other accessories. And that engine, fully dressed, now fully dressed with a gearbox, was 850 pounds. Add in turbos to that and a bunch of other accessories that the 308 didn't have, easily over 900. Once we have a gearbox on this thing, it's going to be lighter, I guarantee it, quite a bit so.
Now, of course, there will be some of you that want to know about other potential engine choices, such as an LS or even another K-Series, and those were never an option for this project. I knew from the get-go that it had to be a Ferrari power plant for the same reasons that I had to buy authentic F40 panels. This will never be a real F40 in the truest sense, but I want it to be a true Ferrari in my eyes. Again, a real tube chassis F40 that is the best car we could possibly put together. One that's purist friendly and feels like a Ferrari in spirit no matter who you are. Of course, something like a 4-rotor would be crazy, as would a Judd V10, but if we're going to compare to something like a Judd V10, well, this V12 makes even more horsepower, revs just as high, and doesn't require a team of engineers just to keep it running. This engine has turnkey reliability, and it means we can just get in this car and drive it. It has normal maintenance intervals, despite having Formula 1 levels of power and sound, and again, this all comes down to the fact that it's also just the right engine. It's from Ferrari, and it's their masterpiece.
All right, now let's talk about the back side of this engine. This is the smallest flywheel I've ever seen on a factory engine, especially one of this size. I measured, it's like 7.5 inches. It's so small. What are we gonna do about this? We're gonna need a custom flywheel and a custom clutch to go with a transmission. What are we gonna use there? Well, if we wanna use a factory option, we're very limited. Anything that Ferrari made that's a mid-engine V12 is going to only have a DCT. They haven't made a manual V12 mid-engine car in a long time. What are those DCTs going to be out of? Well, our options are a LaFerrari, an Enzo, or an SP3, and I can't afford any of those parts. So what's the alternative? Well, thankfully, the guys over at Hollinger are going to partner with us for this project, and they've agreed to build us a one-off, completely custom transaxle that's not only straight cut sequential, but air shifted with paddles. It's going to be insane.
Now, obviously, I don't have a gearbox to show you yet, but it doesn't mean we can't talk about them. The Brabham BT62 utilizes the exact same transmission we're going to be running in the F40. Seeing it is one thing, but hearing it is something else entirely. Hollinger is one of the leading names when it comes to motorsport transmissions and transaxles, and so they were an obvious choice to turn to when trying to figure out who on earth could build a transaxle for such a custom project. We're not the first to use an F140 as an engine swap, but we're definitely in uncharted territory.
All right, now I want to answer some questions for the engine nerds out there, because some of you are wondering, what are we going to do about these? Because these are high-pressure fuel pumps, and this is a direct injection engine. That means we're putting fuel directly into the cylinders instead of the ports like pretty much any other engine we've used on this channel before. This is new modern technology, and while we could make this stuff work if we want to, I don't have a huge desire to. This is a very complicated fuel system. These are high-pressure fuel rails that are holding injectors down into the engine. Really high compression stuff, and in order to get rid of this, not only are we going to have to remove it, we're going to have to custom machine a bunch of pieces that go in and block all of those holes off, and then we're going to have to build a system that will bolt down and retain it and hold it in there, because otherwise this stuff's going to try to self-destruct, and we do not want that.
Instead, we want to make sure that we have a very simple and elegant solution to close this off and convert it to a bit more old school port injection, but it's going to be a bit more tuner friendly, and honestly, we don't need this newfangled stuff. I like simplicity. Let's keep it simple. Now, believe it or not, we already have what we're going to need to run this engine. We're going to use another Haltech Nexus R5 VCU. This thing's more than happy to run a 12-cylinder engine, including its twin banks with variable cam timing. This thing will do it all. And it's going to mean that we're not going to wait until the car is done in order to fire this engine up. We're actually in the middle of designing an engine stand for this thing that we can run the engine on well before it ever actually winds up in the car. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to wait a couple of years just to hear this thing sing. And it's going to be a fun project to make some progress elsewhere when I need a break from fabrication. Let me show you everything that we have from Haltech. As you can see, we've got a lot of firepower on hand from our friends in Australia, but the piece I'm most excited to show you is probably the UC10 Digital Dash, mostly because I've yet to get my hands on one of these. Not only is it a beautiful display, it's also a huge functionality increase over the IC7 we have in the 244 GTK, because this dash allows input to the ECU. We can use it to control a lot of functions and features. I'll give you the full rundown once we get it up and running, but it's going to complement the rest of the hardware that we're going to need in order to fire up and run this V12. Of course, the heart of the system is the Nexus R5, which is both an ECU and a PDM or power distribution module all in one unit. But to accompany it, we're going to pair it with a second PD16 PDU, just like we've done in the 244 GTK, because we've got a lot of extra accessories that we want to run. We also need all the inputs and outputs we can get, because we're also going to set this engine up with two TCA8 thermocouple amplifier modules, because we're going to run thermocouple EGT sensors on all 12 cylinders. I want all of the data that we can possibly get on this engine, not only to run it at its peak efficiency and power, but so that we can keep it alive in a worst case scenario, because trust me, I do not want to have to replace this thing. I probably can't afford to do that.
Now, I began episode 2 by asking what's better than one F40, and the answer was 2. I'm going to end episode 3 by asking what's better than one V12, and the answer again is 2. I have a second F140 V12 sitting here, but as you can see, this one has seen better days. It's got a huge hole through it. We're not going to try to fix this, but this is going to serve as a mock-up engine. I don't want to put our nice new clean engine inside of a car we're going to be cutting, grinding, and welding on for the next 2 years. This one I don't have to worry about anything happening to, but with that said, it is still absolutely disgusting. So, in the next episode, we're going to get this entire thing cleaned up and powder coated so that it looks nice and brand new, because I don't want to look at this thing, and I know you guys don't either. We're going to get it all dolled up, and then we're going to put it in the F40 and get it positioned where it needs to be so that we can begin the process of designing our chassis. You have that to look forward to next week. Thank you guys again for the support, and of course, don't forget, snag the apparel while it's in stock. It's the best way to support us here and what we're doing. I'll see you guys next week.